Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, pouring your coffee, and suddenly you just know how to code in Python.
Right. Or maybe you realize you can fluently speak Mandarin, which is crazy.
Yeah, and it's not because you stayed up all night cramming flashcards or reading textbooks. The knowledge just, sits there in your mind.
It feels completely natural, exactly like the pure muscle memory of riding a bike or tying your shoelaces.
Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking you into a world where that scenario isn't actually science fiction. We're looking at the reality of a revolutionary educational technology that totally transformed a failing nation in just 6 short years.
It really is a profound shift to wrap your head around, and we're looking at a single, incredibly revealing source today to understand it all.
Right, it's a transcript, right?
Yeah, a transcript of an address given by the Right Honourable Sir Ryland Ramstern. He's the UK Secretary of State for Education and Cognitive Development.
And he was giving the speech to the British Educational Press Association.
Exactly. And the mission for this deep dive is to really unpack this specific address because Ramstern lays out these breathtaking, almost unimaginable successes, but he also pulls back the curtain on the quiet, devastating human costs.
To truly understand the magnitude of what happened, we actually need to look at where the UK started. Because if you go back just 6 years prior to this speech, the UK Education Department was, in Ramstern's own words, the laughingstock of the developed world.
The statistics from that era were genuinely grim. We're talking about a nation that ranked 43rd globally in mathematics.
Wow, 43rd.
Yeah, and 39th in reading. And their science scores were so embarrassing that the previous administration actually stopped publishing them entirely.
Wait, they just stopped publishing the data. That is like systemic collapse.
Complete collapse. Out of pure honesty, they just threw their hands up, and the human toll was just as bad. Teachers were fleeing the profession at such a staggering rate that the Royal College of Teaching dubbed it a slow national bereavement.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because a slow national bereavement is a really heavy phrase.
It is. It paints a picture of a country mourning its own future.
But then, fast forward to the present day of this speech, so 6 years later, they are first.
First in everything.
First in math, first in reading, coding, financial literacy, trade skills. They went from the absolute bottom of the barrel to first in every single category measured by the OECD.
Which naturally makes them the undisputed envy of the globe.
Yeah.
Every other nation is scrambling to understand what happened.
And the driving force behind this miraculous turnaround was a piece of technology that's simply referred to in the text as the hypnotic dot.
Right, the hypnotic dot.
If you're listening to this right now, you're probably thinking the exact same thing I did. When you hear about a magic piece of tech that can instantly make you a genius, you assume it's a pure silver bullet.
Oh, absolutely. It's like finding a literal cheat code for human development.
Frankly, you would think the first thing any desperate government would want to do is spam that cheat code on the youngest players. Like, get the kids wired up in kindergarten, pump them full of astrophysics, and solve your national crisis overnight.
Well, what's fascinating here is the minister's remarkable restraint in the face of that exact temptation. During the speech, he actually calls it the most controversial decision he ever signed his name to.
The decision to wait, right?
Yeah. When the military first demonstrated that this dot could be safely used on older teenagers for sustained tasks, his political advisors completely swarmed his office. They wanted to lower the age threshold to 7.
7 years old. Just putting a hypnotic learning device on a second grader. That's wild.
They brought in productivity curves, massive projections, and these very persuasive graphs showing how many additional Nobel laureates the country would produce by 2050.
Just if they put the dot on a child before their 7th birthday. The economic arguments were overwhelmingly in favor of starting early.
But Ramstern looked at those Nobel laureate graphs and essentially just said, no.
He just sent them away.
He argued that the clinical evidence on developing brains wasn't fully in yet. And on a personal level, he mentioned having 2 grandchildren under 10, which clearly colored his perspective.
So he firmly, stubbornly set the floor for this technology at age 13.
Exactly. And by drawing that hard line, he accidentally forced the country to do something beautiful. They had to reclaim childhood.
I love that concept, because if you completely ban the dot until age 13, you suddenly have to figure out what those early years are actually for.
Right. If you aren't desperately trying to cram fractions and grammar into a 10-year-old's head so they can pass a standardized test, what do you do with them?
Yeah, Ramstern mentions that they stopped treating the pre-13 years as a holding pen or a softening up exercise for secondary school.
They overhauled the entire early years framework. They rebuilt the curriculum around 4 distinct pillars: social interaction, communication, emotional literacy, and physical confidence.
I mean, they still teach basic reading and numbers, obviously, but the relentless drilling is just gone.
Right. So they aren't testing these young kids to within an inch of their lives anymore.
Not at all. Instead of testing, they give them time. They give them the company of other children.
And most importantly, they provide adult educators who are now paid properly just to notice them and guide them.
So they're intentionally building a foundation of deep human resilience so that when a child finally turns 13, they're mentally and emotionally prepared for the shock of the dot.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you hear the phrase hypnotic dot, and you immediately think of understanding by injection.
Right, the classic sci-fi trope. You picture someone plugging a cable into their neck like in The Matrix, their eyes fluttering, and suddenly they open them and say, I know Kung Fu.
But Ramstern specifically refutes that characterization. He says the press has been sloppy about explaining this.
It is not a digital download where you can suddenly quote a textbook word for word.
That distinction is crucial. The neuroscience he describes in the address is a biological process called supervised consolidation.
Okay, supervised consolidation.
To understand it, think about how normal human memory works. Usually, you study something, it sits in your short-term memory, and then when you sleep, your brain slowly moves some of that information into long-term storage.
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around how the dot changes that, though. Are they just sleeping in class?
It's more like a hyper-targeted artificial sleep state. When the student enters this hypnotic state with the dot, the material they are studying bypasses the short-term holding areas entirely.
So it just gets fast-tracked.
Exactly. The dot forces the hippocampus to immediately move that information into the frontal cortex as what Ramstern calls integrated competence.
Integrated competence, meaning it bypasses the part of your brain that remembers learning it and goes straight to the part of your brain that just knows how to do it.
Precisely. If a student takes the Level 1 personal finance module, they do not wake up remembering the name of the textbook author or the layout of the chapters.
But they do have the visceral ability to answer 98% of the questions that textbook was designed to teach. They just have the muscle memory of the concept.
Which completely changes the philosophy of what you teach first. Ramstern notes that Level 1 hypnoschooling doesn't begin with advanced calculus or theoretical physics.
It begins with practical, mundane adult survival, right?
Yeah, personal finance, database logic, civic understanding, how a contract actually works, how a tenancy agreement works.
He makes this point that no 13-year-old should ever leave Level 1 unable to read a payslip or cast an informed vote.
They're aggressively prioritizing the things previous generations had to learn the hard way in their 20s and 30s, usually by making terrible financial mistakes.
But to achieve this level of competence, I mean, the way they structure the actual school day is just as radical as the curriculum itself.
Oh, the radical split of the day.
Yeah.
The morning is for absorption. That's when the information is being pushed into the hippocampus.
But the afternoons are reserved for what they call integration.
During the afternoons, the dot stays on, so the students remain in the trance. But they aren't passively absorbing information at a desk anymore.
They're physically moving around practicing.
Right. A Level 3 engineering student will spend 2 hours dismantling and rebuilding mechanical engines.
And a Level 2 language student will spend those same 2 hours walking around a simulated environment conversing with native speakers.
Wait, so they spend hours doing highly complex physical work, speaking foreign languages, building engines. And when the afternoon ends, they wake up with zero conscious memory of what they just did.
None whatsoever. To their conscious mind, they just blinked and the day was over. But their hands now fully possess the skill.
If you put an engine block in front of that engineering student the next morning, they just inherently know how to take it apart the same way you know how to tie your shoes.
That is just wild to think about. And naturally, because of this hyper-accelerated individualized learning, they had to completely abolish age-based grading.
It became instantly obsolete. If you have a bright 14-year-old in carpentry who is vastly outperforming a struggling 16-year-old, keeping them in the same room simply because they share a birth year helps neither of them.
So students are now grouped purely by skill level, by capacity, and by what Ramstern beautifully calls the shape of a child's mind.
Which brings us to an incredible cultural milestone mentioned in the speech. With all the traditional drudgery, the rote memorization, and the pure friction of classroom learning completely bypassed, the Oxford English Dictionary is actually retiring a word.
This part blew my mind. For the under 20 demographic, the OED is classifying the word bored as historic.
Historic. It is being placed right alongside words like gramophone and teleprinter.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a staggering sociological shift.
Ramstern shares a personal anecdote in the address that really drives this home. He kept his own childhood school reports from when he was 9 to 15 years old.
And every single one of them contains some variation of the same administrative complaint. Ryland is an able boy who appears to find the curriculum unstimulating.
He points out that he was painfully bored for 6 vital years of his life, and the country paid for that wasted potential.
He actually says that today's youth sometimes ask him what being bored feels like, because the conditions that produced boredom sitting in a rigid desk for hours listening to a drone just don't exist in their world anymore.
But that made me wonder, if you completely remove the friction of learning, do you accidentally kill creativity?
Because sometimes struggling with a problem, getting frustrated, is what makes you invent a new way to solve it. Are these kids just highly efficient robots?
The speech directly addresses that fear,
Yeah.
and the reality is actually the exact opposite. Removing the friction didn't kill creativity. It was like a dam bursting.
Because the morning is for trance absorption and the afternoon is for trance practice, these kids wake up at 3 p.m. and finish their school day with massive reserves of conscious, creative energy.
Ramstern uses a very specific word to describe them. He says they are hungry.
Hungry for skill in the way previous generations were hungry for, like passive distraction, like doom scrolling.
Exactly. And this hunger has led to an explosion in the crafter trades. The physical, tangible, deeply human trades have come back from the dead.
England currently has more young blacksmiths operating than it has had since 1890.
There are ironmongers, weavers, mold batch programmers doing artisanal hobbyist coding as a local export industry.
He mentions this specific example of a 14-year-old girl in Sheffield who is a cooper. She makes wooden barrels by hand.
Right, she's already on her second apprenticeship and is about to be featured on the cover of the Times magazine.
Okay, but a 14-year-old artisanal barrel maker on the cover of the Times sounds, a little too perfect. It sounds like an absolute utopia.
You have a generation of highly competent, engaged, hyper-skilled young people who never experienced boredom.
But a totally friction-free brain upload has to break something else, right? What is the catch?
This is exactly where the tone of the address shifts. At the 19-minute mark, the minister transitions to the dark half of the story.
Because any technology that powerfully alters human cognition is going to have a shadow.
Ramstern refers to it as the hidden tax of this hyper-efficiency.
So what does this all mean for them as human beings? It feels like they built a perfect greenhouse.
The plants grow huge, they blossom beautifully, there are no pests, and all the academic metrics look perfect.
But what happens when you take them outside into the actual wind? Don't they just snap?
That greenhouse analogy aligns perfectly with the psychological fallout Ramstern had to confront in the data. This raises an important question. The numbers are clear, and he doesn't hide from them.
This is undoubtedly the most skilled generation in human history. But they are also the loneliest.
They report drastically fewer close friendships. They struggle immensely to read the emotional states of strangers.
And the tragic part is that the mechanism of the trance itself is directly to blame, isn't it?
The trance, by its very design, is a low-surprise environment. It is perfectly optimized, entirely predictable, and emotionally safe. Your brain is never caught off guard.
Because this generation has been raised inside that low-surprise cognitive space for their formative academic years, they have entirely lost the appetite for the high-surprise environment of unmediated, unpredictable human conversation.
Think about that for a second. I want you to really imagine living in that reality.
You live in a world where you are objectively brilliant at almost everything. You can build a relational database. You can rebuild a combustion engine. You can parse a dense legal contract with a glance.
But you are secretly, fundamentally terrified of having a spontaneous chat with a stranger at a coffee shop because you can't predict what they're going to say next.
It's a profound crisis of human connection. And the government tried to mitigate it, right? Remember the pre-13 pillars?
Those were supposed to bank as much human contact and emotional resilience as possible before the dot went on. The evening crafting clubs for the blacksmiths and weavers were designed to be aggressively social.
But it hasn't been enough. The very tools that produced immense nation-saving competence simultaneously produced a severe shortage of human intimacy.
But as heartbreaking as that systemic, generational loneliness is, Ramstern ends his speech on something even heavier.
We move from this broad, systemic sociological issue to a really profound, devastating individual reality.
Because if the vast majority are suffering from social isolation inside this perfect greenhouse, what happens to the people who can't even get inside the greenhouse to begin with?
This is the portion of the address where the atmosphere in the room completely changed. He actually requested that no questions be taken at the end of this section.
He revealed that for roughly 3% of the population, the hypnotic dot simply does not work.
3% of the country.
3%. And they still don't know exactly why. Top neurologists and geneticists have theories, but that percentage hasn't budged a fraction of an inch in 6 years.
And Ramstern is agonizingly clear on this point. These are not children with underlying learning difficulties.
They aren't less intelligent, they aren't less curious, and they aren't less loved by their families. Their brains simply, biologically, cannot hold the trance state stably enough for the supervised consolidation process to occur.
It's like cognitive hyperinflation. It's like trying to buy a house in a 2034 real estate market using a 1995 entry-level salary.
The national mean of intelligence hasn't just gone up a little bit. It has completely and totally run away from them at light speed.
That is the exact nightmare they are living. The state obviously tried to build support systems for this 3%, right?
They created remedial streams and something they call mental athletics. Mental athletics is essentially intensive, traditional, conscious instruction. It's the way you and I learned.
And it works, mostly. By brute forcing it, they can produce what we would historically consider a well-educated young person by hand, one at a time.
But it's not enough anymore. Because a young person who is considered ordinary or even bright by 1995 standards is today officially classified in cold clinical language under the 2034 Act as cognitively assisted.
And Ramstern puts a human face to this statistic. He introduces a young man named Malcolm Rogers.
Malcolm is 22 years old, living in Wolverhampton. Ramstern personally met with Malcolm's mother, who tearfully told him that Malcolm is the cleverest boy on our road.
And by all traditional metrics, he is. He spent 3 grueling years trying to get the dot to take, showing extraordinary patience and resilience.
When it failed, he pushed through the grueling mental athletics program to get a respectable set of traditional qualifications.
Just wow. So under the 2034 Act, Malcolm, this clever, patient, incredibly steady young man who did everything right, is officially classified by his own government as cognitively disabled.
Simply because the world accelerated around him so violently. To survive in normal society, Malcolm now has to wear an AI communication bracelet at all times.
This device constantly whispers contextual facts into his ear. The current going rate for an accountant, shifting interest rates, the names of local government ministers, complex bus routes.
And he doesn't wear it because he's stupid. He wears it so he isn't visibly stranded in a room full of his peers who just magically downloaded all that vast context in an afternoon while they were asleep.
One of his support workers described Malcolm to Ramstern in a way that just brace your heart. They called him an 18th century man living in a 22nd century world.
You can feel Ramstern's deep, personal, moral agony bleeding through the transcript here. He privately admires Malcolm. He speaks highly of what he calls Malcolm's slow, careful intelligence.
In literally any previous era of human history, Malcolm would have been perfectly wildly successful. He would have run a local business, been a trusted foreman, been a pillar of his community.
But the state, by adopting the dot, has effectively redrawn the biological line of what constitutes a normal human being.
They took a perfectly capable, intelligent man and turned him into a disabled citizen just by moving the goalposts at the speed of light.
And Ramstern admits on stage, well, he doesn't know what to do. He says he lies awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if they did the right thing.
But he also admits the brutal math of the situation. He cannot, in good conscience, pull the dot off the necks of the 97% just to save the 3% from feeling alienated.
It is an impossible, unsolvable ethical trap. They solved the education crisis, they abolished the concept of boredom, they made their youth the most functionally capable generation in recorded history.
But the steep price of that progress was leaving perfectly ordinary, decent people like Malcolm standing on the wrong side of a newly drawn line, wearing an AI bracelet just to participate in a conversation.
When Ramstern finished that speech and walked off the stage, the transcript actually notes that the applause from the press gallery was unusually quiet, because the weight of that reality is just crushing.
It forces a profound reckoning. Every single average we celebrate as a society is an average of someone.
And the people falling to the bottom of this new, hyper-elevated average aren't lesser people. As Ramstern poignantly put it to the silent room, They are the people we used to call ourselves.
We have covered a massive journey today in this deep dive. From a broken, laughingstock educational system hemorrhaging teachers to a glittering, hyper-competent yet incredibly lonely utopia.
A world where being average from just a few short years ago now requires a whispering AI support bracelet just to mask your lack of instantly downloaded knowledge.
I want you to think about your own mind as you go about the rest of your day. Think about how you learn, how you stumble, the frustration and friction you face when mastering a new skill.
There is immense, irreplaceable value in your own slow, careful intelligence.
It's the friction that makes us human.
Routine, exactly.
But I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building purely on the logic of everything we just explored.
Sarah?
If the definition of a normal human being is just an artificial line drawn by whatever technology currently exists, what happens when the next massive upgrade arrives?
Oh, wow.
If a new, even faster, even deeper method of learning is invented next year that leaves today's hyper-capable 97% in the dust, will today's translearners become tomorrow's Malcolm Rogers, needing their own AI bracelets just to survive in the very world they built?
That is a terrifying and, well, entirely plausible possibility.
Something to chew on. Catch you on the next deep dive.
That's a wrap on today's chapter. We hope you enjoyed settling in with us over your lunch break. New chapters drop twice a week right here on the New Atlantis Inc., so make sure you're subscribed and hit the notification bell so you never miss what happens next. This story is also available on Amazon in hardback, paperback, and Kindle editions. Thanks for being here. We'll see you at our next lunchtime listening, and keep on reading.